Something happened in the Lil Durk case that has people asking a question almost nobody expected to ask. Are federal prosecutors trying too hard to win this case? Now, before anybody jumps to conclusions, let's be clear. This isn't about deciding whether Lil Durk is guilty or innocent. That's exactly what the jury is supposed to determine. But what happened inside the courtroom has suddenly shifted attention away from the defense and directly onto the government's strategy. According to newly filed court motions, prosecutors are asking the judge to limit what the defense can say publicly, restrict certain expert testimony, and keep several categories of evidence away from the jury. At the same time, they're also pushing to introduce a music video and rap lyrics that they argue reveal motive and intent. The defense, however, has pushed back, arguing that rap music, industry practices, and artistic expression should not automatically be treated as literal criminal evidence. Those competing arguments are now becoming one of the biggest battles before the trial even begins. And here's where things get even more interesting. During a recent hearing, the judge reportedly challenged prosecutors over one of their legal strategies, creating a moment that immediately caught the attention of courtroom observers. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't just about Lil Durk anymore. It became about whether the government's approach would hold up under judicial scrutiny. So today we're breaking down exactly what the prosecution is trying to keep out, why the defense believes some of these motions go too far, and why this legal fight could shape everything that happens once the trial officially begins. Because if you've only seen the headlines, trust me, you're missing the biggest story unfolding behind the scenes. If you've been following the Lil Durk case from the beginning, then you already know this hasn't been an ordinary federal prosecution. Almost every hearing has produced another surprise, another legal battle, or another filing that sends social media into a frenzy. But what happened over the latest round of court filings has people asking whether prosecutors are becoming more focused on controlling the narrative than simply presenting their evidence. That's because several of the government's newest motions don't just target what happens inside the courtroom. They also attempt to limit how the case is discussed outside of it. And for a case that's already under a national spotlight, that immediately caught people's attention. One of the biggest issues involves the government's request for a limited gag order. In simple terms, prosecutors want to restrict certain public comments about the case, arguing that continued media appearances and public statements from the defense could influence potential jurors before the trial even begins. From the government's perspective, they're trying to protect the integrity of the trial and prevent outside publicity from affecting the jury pool. That's a legal argument courts sometimes hear in high-profile criminal cases. But the defense has strongly opposed that request, arguing that prosecutors themselves have publicly discussed aspects of the case through official announcements, while now attempting to silence criticism directed back at them. That disagreement has quickly become one of the most talked about issues surrounding the case. Then came a courtroom exchange that immediately spread across legal commentators and social media discussions. During a hearing, the judge questioned prosecutors about one of their litigation strategies, creating a moment that many observers interpreted as unusually direct. While people have offered different opinions about exactly what the judge's comments mean, the exchange fueled even more debate about whether the prosecution's overall strategy could face greater scrutiny as the case moves closer to trial. Moments like that are rare because judges typically avoid giving either side the impression that they favor one argument over another. That's why even a few pointed questions inside a courtroom can become headline news. At the same time, prosecutors are asking the court to prevent the defense from presenting several categories of evidence that they argue are irrelevant or could confuse jurors. Among those requests is an effort to limit testimony from certain expert witnesses expected to explain rap music, drill culture, and how lyrics should, or should not, be interpreted in a criminal investigation. The defense has indicated that these experts would help jurors understand the difference between artistic expression, industry marketing, and actual criminal conduct. Prosecutors, however, argue that some of the proposed testimony overlaps, risks confusing the jury, or extends beyond what experts should be allowed to discuss in court. That legal battle has become especially important because prosecutors also want to introduce portions of Lil Durk's music and videos as evidence. According to the government's filings, they believe specific lyrics and visual imagery may demonstrate motive or intent connected to their allegations. The defense strongly disagrees with that interpretation, maintaining that rap music often includes fictional, exaggerated, or symbolic language that should not automatically be viewed as literal admissions of criminal activity. This isn't the first time courts have wrestled with that issue. For years, artists, attorneys, and legal scholars have debated whether rap lyrics should be treated differently from fictional storytelling in other forms of entertainment. What makes this situation even more complicated is that the defense has prepared multiple expert witnesses who specialize in rap culture, music history, and entertainment business practices. Their role would be to explain how hip-hop artists frequently create larger-than-life personas, exaggerate events, and use dramatic language that is designed to entertain audiences rather than document real-life crimes. Prosecutors have asked the court to exclude or narrow portions of that testimony, arguing that some experts would repeat similar opinions or discuss matters they believe are outside the scope of expert evidence. That disagreement could significantly shape what jurors ultimately hear during the trial. Another issue generating attention involves what prosecutors say the defense should not discuss in front of the jury. Government motions seek to limit references to charging decisions, prior versions of the indictment, celebrity endorsements, fan support, charitable work, and other personal factors that prosecutors argue have little connection to the charges being tried. Their position is that those topics could distract jurors from the actual evidence. The defense, on the other hand, is expected to argue that some of those issues provide necessary context about the government's investigation and the public narrative surrounding the case. As both sides continue filing motions before trial officially begins, one thing has become increasingly clear. The courtroom battle is no longer just about witnesses or evidence. It is also about who gets to shape the story jurors hear from the very beginning. Every motion granted or denied could change how the case unfolds once opening statements begin. And with so much attention focused on every legal filing, this trial is already becoming one of the most closely watched federal cases involving a major rap artist in recent years. As the legal fight continues, one of the most controversial issues isn't even about a witness or physical evidence. It's about music. Prosecutors are asking the court to admit portions of Lil Durk's lyrics and one of his music videos, arguing that the material helps establish motive and intent connected to the allegations in the indictment. That's a strategy that has sparked debate far beyond this single case because it raises a question that has divided legal experts, artists, and fans for years. When does entertainment become evidence? And should fictional or exaggerated lyrics ever be interpreted as literal statements inside a criminal courtroom? The defense believes that answer should be approached with extreme caution. Their legal team has lined up experts prepared to explain how rap music has long relied on storytelling, larger-than-life personas, metaphors, and dramatic language that doesn't necessarily reflect real-world actions. According to the defense, many successful artists create music that mixes reality with fiction because audiences expect emotionally powerful performances rather than autobiographical confessions. Their position is that jurors unfamiliar with rap culture could misunderstand artistic expression if they hear lyrics without proper context. Federal prosecutors disagree. They argue that in this specific case, certain lyrics and visual imagery are relevant because they believe they connect to issues the jury will eventually consider. That's why they've asked the court to admit selected portions of music while simultaneously challenging some of the expert testimony the defense intends to present. Prosecutors have argued that several experts would offer repetitive opinions or discuss topics that are either unnecessary or beyond the proper scope of expert testimony. In other words, both sides are fighting over who gets to explain the meaning of the music before the jury ever hears it. This isn't a small procedural dispute. Depending on how the judge rules, the jury could receive very different versions of the same evidence. If prosecutors succeed in introducing lyrics while limiting expert explanations, jurors may hear the government's interpretation with fewer competing perspectives. If the defense succeeds in presenting its experts, jurors could also hear broader testimony about rap culture, creative expression, industry practices, and why artists sometimes portray fictional events in their music. Those rulings could influence how jurors evaluate not only the songs themselves but also the arguments built around them. Another issue attracting attention involves prosecutors' requests to prevent the defense from discussing certain topics they consider irrelevant during trial. Government filings argue that references to fan support, celebrity endorsements, charitable activities, family circumstances, or possible punishment should not influence jurors deciding whether the charges have been proven. From the prosecution's standpoint, those issues could distract the jury from focusing solely on admissible evidence presented in court. Defense attorneys, however, are expected to argue that some background information may provide important context regarding public perception and the government's investigation. The prosecution has also challenged portions of the defense's proposed expert testimony related to the music industry itself. Some experts are expected to explain how record labels, attorneys, managers, and marketing teams often review songs before release. They may also discuss why artists create public personas, participate in collaborations, or use dramatic imagery to strengthen their brand. Prosecutors have argued that some of those opinions are unnecessary or overlap with testimony from other experts. The defense, meanwhile, maintains that understanding how the entertainment industry operates could help jurors evaluate the government's interpretation of the music being introduced. Beyond the arguments over lyrics and expert witnesses, both sides continue battling over the overall narrative that will reach the jury. Prosecutors want the focus to remain on evidence directly tied to the allegations. The defense wants room to challenge how that evidence is interpreted and to argue that artistic expression should not automatically be treated as proof of criminal intent. That difference may sound technical, but it sits at the heart of one of the trial's biggest legal questions. The outcome won't simply affect this case. Observers believe it could become another closely watched example in the ongoing national conversation about the use of rap lyrics in criminal proceedings. Legal analysts have pointed out that pretrial motions like these often shape a case long before opening statements begin. Judges frequently decide what evidence jurors can hear, which experts may testify, and what arguments each side can present. Those decisions establish the boundaries of the trial itself. That's why attorneys on both sides invest so much effort into these hearings. Every ruling has the potential to strengthen one argument, while limiting another, making the pretrial phase almost as important as the trial that follows. For now, one thing is certain. The legal battle surrounding Lil Durk extends far beyond a simple disagreement over one song or one motion. It has evolved into a broader fight over how modern rap culture, artistic creativity, and criminal investigations intersect inside a federal courtroom. Whether the judge grants or denies these requests, the decisions made before jurors are even seated could have a major impact on how this highly watched case unfolds in the weeks ahead. One issue that has generated even more discussion is the government's effort to limit what the defense can present about Lil Durk himself. Prosecutors have argued that jurors should not hear evidence about celebrity endorsements, charitable work, fan support, or other personal achievements because those topics do not directly address the criminal charges. From a legal standpoint, prosecutors say the jury should focus only on evidence that is relevant to deciding guilt or innocence. That position is not unusual in criminal cases. Courts often exclude information that could unfairly sway jurors through sympathy or popularity rather than facts tied to the allegations. However, the defense is expected to argue that some background information provides important context and helps explain how public narratives surrounding high-profile artists are formed. Another major disagreement involves statements made outside the courtroom. Prosecutors have complained that members of the defense team have discussed the case publicly through interviews, podcasts, and social media, arguing that those comments risk influencing potential jurors before trial begins. As a result, they requested a limited gag order designed to reduce additional public commentary. The defense opposed that request, maintaining that public responses are appropriate when answering accusations that have already received widespread attention. This disagreement has become another layer of the larger legal battle because both sides recognize how much public interest surrounds every development in the case. At the same time, the defense continues preparing experts who would explain the business side of the music industry. Those witnesses are expected to discuss how major recording artists build public images, why collaborations are planned strategically, and how songs often pass through multiple levels of review before release. The defense believes that understanding those industry practices could help jurors evaluate the government's interpretation of specific lyrics or videos. Prosecutors, however, argue that some of those opinions either repeat testimony expected from other experts or address matters that are not necessary for jurors deciding the issues before them. The judge will ultimately decide how much of that testimony is permitted. Another closely watched dispute involves prior statements allegedly made by the defendant. Prosecutors have argued that while they may introduce certain statements under established rules of evidence, the defense should not automatically be permitted to introduce the defendant's own prior statements unless they satisfy those same legal standards. That disagreement centers on technical evidentiary rules rather than the truth or falsity of any statement itself. Still, these kinds of rulings can influence what information jurors hear once testimony begins, making them extremely important even though they receive far less public attention than dramatic courtroom exchanges. Meanwhile, prosecutors are also seeking to introduce various business records from companies they believe are relevant to the investigation. Court filings reference records from airlines, telecommunications providers, transportation services, and other businesses. According to prosecutors, those records help establish timelines and other facts connected to the government's case. The defense is expected to examine those records carefully and challenge any conclusions they believe go beyond what the documents actually prove. Like many complex federal prosecutions, much of the evidence may ultimately consist of digital records, communications, financial information, and travel documentation rather than dramatic eyewitness testimony alone. Perhaps the biggest reason these pretrial hearings have attracted so much attention is because they reveal how both sides intend to present their cases long before opening statements. Prosecutors appear focused on narrowing the issues presented to jurors, excluding evidence they believe could create confusion, and emphasizing materials they argue directly support their allegations. The defense, meanwhile, appears determined to broaden the context surrounding the government's evidence, particularly regarding rap music, entertainment culture, and artistic expression. Those competing strategies highlight two very different approaches to the same set of facts. Legal experts frequently remind the public that pretrial rulings should not be viewed as indications of guilt or innocence. Instead, they establish the framework within which the trial will proceed. Judges routinely decide what evidence may be admitted, which witnesses may testify, and what arguments attorneys may make before jurors. Those decisions are based on rules of evidence and procedure rather than personal opinions about the ultimate outcome of the case. Even when one side wins an important motion, the other side often continues presenting its broader theory through different witnesses or additional evidence introduced later during trial. As the trial date approaches, public attention continues growing because the case now touches on issues extending beyond one individual defendant. It raises broader questions about the relationship between artistic expression and criminal investigations, the role of expert testimony in helping jurors understand modern music culture, and the balance courts must strike between protecting a fair trial and respecting public discussion of highly visible cases. Those questions have surfaced in multiple cases involving rap artists over the past decade, making this proceeding especially significant for legal observers as well as music fans. For now, every new motion filed by either side adds another piece to a legal puzzle that remains far from complete. The judge's upcoming rulings will determine what evidence jurors hear, which experts take the stand, and how both sides present their arguments once the trial officially begins. Until then, much of the battle will continue taking place through written motions, courtroom hearings, and careful legal arguments that could shape one of the most closely followed federal prosecutions involving a major recording artist in recent memory. As this case moves closer to trial, it is becoming increasingly clear that the biggest fight may not be over one witness, one document, or even one song. Instead, it is becoming a battle over interpretation. Prosecutors argue that the evidence they intend to present tells a clear story about motive, intent, and criminal conduct. The defense argues that much of that same material can only be understood if jurors receive proper context about rap music, entertainment culture, and the realities of the recording industry. Those competing narratives are now on a direct collision course, and the judge's rulings will determine how much of each side's story the jury is ultimately allowed to hear. One reason this case has attracted so much national attention is because it reflects a broader legal debate that has existed for years. Courts across the United States have increasingly been asked to consider whether rap lyrics should be treated differently from other forms of artistic expression. Supporters of using lyrics as evidence argue that, in some situations, specific statements may be relevant if they are closely connected to the facts of a criminal investigation. Critics argue that rap music often relies on fictional storytelling, exaggeration, symbolism, and performance, making it dangerous to assume every lyric reflects real-life conduct. That larger debate extends well beyond Lil Durk's case, which is why legal scholars, artists, and civil liberties organizations have continued following these proceedings so closely. Another important point that many casual observers overlook is that pretrial motions are a normal part of federal criminal cases. It is common for both prosecutors and defense attorneys to ask judges to exclude evidence they believe is improper or unfairly prejudicial. Likewise, it is common for each side to challenge proposed expert witnesses before trial begins. While these motions sometimes generate dramatic headlines, they are ultimately designed to help define the legal boundaries of the trial. Winning or losing a motion does not automatically predict the final outcome of the case. Instead, it shapes what information the jury will hear when both sides begin presenting evidence. Still, the sheer number of contested issues in this case has made it unusually fascinating. Prosecutors are seeking to admit certain evidence while excluding other categories of testimony. The defense is asking the court to allow experts who can explain rap culture, music industry practices, and artistic expression while resisting efforts to narrow their presentation. Every filing adds another layer to an already complex legal battle. Even experienced courtroom observers have noted that the volume of pretrial litigation reflects how aggressively both sides are preparing for what could become a lengthy and closely watched trial. Beyond the legal arguments, there is another reality that cannot be ignored. Public opinion has already become deeply divided. Some people believe the government's evidence will ultimately prove its allegations beyond a reasonable doubt. Others believe prosecutors are placing too much emphasis on music, public image, and artistic expression. Those opinions continue spreading across social media, podcasts, and YouTube channels every day. However, inside the courtroom, those outside discussions are not evidence. Jurors will be instructed to decide the case only on the admissible evidence presented during trial and the law as explained by the judge. That distinction remains one of the most important principles of the American justice system. The coming weeks may also answer several questions that have fueled speculation since the indictment was announced. Which expert witnesses will actually testify? Will jurors hear the disputed music and videos? How much background information about the music industry will be admitted? Will the judge approve any limits on public comments by attorneys? Each ruling has the potential to influence trial strategy for both sides. Attorneys frequently adjust witness lists, cross-examinations, and even opening statements after important evidentiary decisions are issued. What appears to be a procedural hearing today could significantly affect the presentation of the case tomorrow. Regardless of where public opinion currently stands, one fact remains unchanged. Every defendant is presumed innocent unless proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in court. Likewise, prosecutors bear the burden of proving every element of the charges using admissible evidence. The defense is not required to prove innocence. Instead, its role is to challenge the government's evidence, question its interpretations, and present lawful arguments that create reasonable doubt if supported by the facts. That legal standard applies in every federal criminal case, regardless of the defendant's fame or the amount of media attention surrounding the proceedings. As the trial approaches, the spotlight will continue shining on every motion, every hearing, and every ruling. What began as a high-profile indictment has evolved into a broader conversation about evidence, artistic expression, and the limits of courtroom advocacy. Whether the judge sides with prosecutors on certain motions or grants some of the defense's requests, the legal process is still unfolding, and many of the most significant decisions have yet to be made. For that reason, the most important developments may still lie ahead. Once jurors are seated and testimony begins, the focus will shift away from speculation and toward the evidence that both sides are ultimately permitted to present. Only then will the courtroom, not social media, determine how this closely watched case moves toward its conclusion. This case is far from over, and if there's one thing we've learned, it's that every new court filing seems to raise even more questions than answers. With the judge preparing to rule on key motions, the next hearing could completely change the direction of this trial. Will prosecutors convince the court to admit the evidence they've been fighting for? Will the defense succeed in bringing in experts to explain rap culture and the music industry? Or will another unexpected courtroom moment shift the momentum once again? We're going to be following every single update, every filing, and every major ruling so you don't miss the details that most headlines leave out. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the prosecution's strategy is strong, or do you believe the defense has raised legitimate concerns about how some of this evidence is being presented? Remember, keep the discussion respectful because this case is still working its way through the legal process, and everyone is entitled to their own opinion based on the facts. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want more in-depth coverage that goes beyond the viral headlines, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you're the first to know whenever there's a major update. We cover the stories that everyone is talking about, and sometimes the ones that nobody else is paying attention to until they become the biggest news of all. Thanks for watching, thanks for being part of this incredible community, and I'll see you in the next video with the latest developments as soon as they happen. Stay safe, stay informed, and I'll catch you next time.